Live to Chicago, CNN's Chris Cuomo is standing by. Chris?
Wolf, you're outlining all the right issues. Let's get the questions together and see if we can get some answers. Thank you very much. Secretary Clinton, it's good to have you as always.
Thank you. Welcome to my hometown,
Chris. Thank you very much. There's a very warm reception here, and you've come home, and yet the problems of the world are upon us.
That's
Once
true.
again, we see in the headline this morning, EgyptAir. They're now finding debris in Greek waters. The Greek authorities, the Egyptian authorities, all saying that they believe this was terror as much as anything else. They're not there investigatively yet, but if that's the theory, it is a reminder to people, not just of the loss of these families, but somehow the loss in the battle against terror. What is your message, and what do you believe the response should be to make something like this less likely?
Well, Chris, it does appear that it was an act of terrorism. Exactly how, of course, the investigation will have to determine. But it once again shines a very bright light on the threats that we face from organized terror groups. ISIS, of course, but then there are other networks of terrorists that have to be hunted down and defeated. And I think it reinforces the need for American leadership, for the kind of smart, steady leadership that only America can provide, in working with our allies, our partners, our friends in Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere, because we have to have a concerted effort that brings to bear both domestic resources, sharing of intelligence, take a hard look at airport security one more time. Whatever needs to be done must be done. The world depends upon air travel. We can't allow it to be interrupted or people be intimidated. And to continue to take the fight, although it needs to be even more intensified, against ISIS from where it is running its operations in Syria and Iraq. So we have to really go along with the kind of plan that I've been outlining for months, which is we're going to defeat them on the ground using our air power, equipping and training and supporting Arab and Kurdish fighters. We're going to drive them out of Iraq, drive them out of their stronghold in Raqqa, Syria. We are going to intensify cooperation among those nations that have a direct stake, which I would argue is just about every nation right now, but principally European, Arab, Middle Eastern. We're going to take them online, and we're going to intensify our intelligence and law enforcement cooperation.
The criticism is that the Obama administration, with you as a part of it, and when you were not a part of it, have been making this case. We're going to attack on every front. And the world seems to be getting worse. It seems that the threat is greater than our ability to defend, protect, and respond to it. Do you believe that things are worse now than they were 7, 8 years ago?
Well, look, I think we have to take a historic view of this. We have been able to defeat in large measure al-Qaeda, which was our principal adversary, responsible for the worst terrorist attack on our shores and terrible ones in Europe. We have to deal with the threats as they come. But I think we have learned a lot more, and we are really grappling with, and I think succeeding at making it more difficult for them to operate from their strongholds. What we now have to also pay a lot of attention to are the literally thousands of people who left Europe, went to Syria and or Iraq, or are in Turkey or somewhere else connected to ISIS or one of the other terrorist networks that are part of the overall threat. We have to work more closely, and we have to really convince forcefully the Europeans that they have to do much more as well. When I was Secretary of State, we were in a constant dialogue with the Europeans because we wanted information about travel manifests for airlines flying across the ocean toward us. It took a while. We finally got it. They have a lot of concerns about privacy and other legitimate issues. But right now, we are in an environment where we have to put everything we can toward the goal of defeating ISIS, protecting ourselves, our friends, and our partners.
How do you fight the perception that we look weak? Trump this morning was out hot and early on Twitter when this happened, saying, looks like another act of terror, more proof that we're weak. We have to be strong. There's a lot of hate and anger out there. He's channeling the perception that a situation like this fuels, which is we are weak. They can take our planes when they want. The Russians, the Chinese, they can scare our military when they want, and America does nothing. How do you answer that?
Well, first of all, he says a lot of things. He says a lot of things that are provocative, that actually make the important task of building this coalition, bringing everybody to the table and defeating terrorism more difficult.
Why?
Well, for example, when he says bar all Muslims from coming to the United States, that sends a signal to majority Muslim nations, many of whom we have to work with in order to defeat terrorism, some of whom are already among our strongest allies in this fight. It sends a message of disrespect, and it sends a message that makes the situation inside those countries more difficult for them to go all in the way we need them to go all in.
To the Americans that message resonates with, where they say, well, these attackers always do seem to be Muslim, and they're coming in here, and Comey, who's in charge of vetting them, says he can't vet them. Trump calls for a temporary ban. It seems to make sense to people. Does it make sense to you?
No, not at all. I mean, let's remember what he's called for and to sort of break it up. He has said all Muslims should be barred from coming into the United States. All Muslims. Nobel Prize winners, entertainers, sports stars, you name it. The new mayor from London. All Muslims should be barred. Now, when confronted with the new mayor from London, who, as you know, is the first Muslim elected to be mayor of London by the people of London, he says, well, I'll make an exception for him. I mean, the whole approach is just incredibly provocative and wrong-headed. And look what he's done just in the last week. He has attacked our closest ally, Great Britain. He has praised the reckless dictator in North Korea. He has said we should pull out of NATO, our strongest military alliance. He has advocated for more countries having nuclear weapons. That kind of unpredictable, dangerous rhetoric and the policies that he throws out there for whatever hope he has to get people to respond to him make us less likely that we're going to be as effective as we need to be going forward in assuaging the concerns of people that we want to be working with us to deal with this threat. And, you know, we have been effective in beginning to kill off the leadership of ISIS, to go after their funding sources, to make it very clear that we're going to keep training the Iraqi army. They've taken back Ramadi. We're going to be supporting them to take back every other part of the territory, most importantly Mosul, that ISIS has seized. So we are making progress. Our biggest concern, and I think if this turns out to be an act of terror, with a flight coming from Paris, our biggest concern is what's going on in Europe. And that is something that we do have to address and deal with all of our partners. And that's going to require even closer cooperation.
Let me ask you, do you think that Donald Trump is qualified to be president?
No, I do not. And I think in this past week, whether it's attacking Great Britain, praising the leader of North Korea, a despotic dictator who has nuclear weapons, whether it is saying pull out of NATO, let other countries have nuclear weapons, the kinds of positions he is stating and the consequences of those positions and even the consequences of his statements are not just offensive to people, they are potentially dangerous.
How so?
Well, as I mentioned...
Politicians talk, Madam Secretary. They say things, but then once they get in office, people believe nothing will be that different.
Well, when you run for President of the United States, the entire world is listening and watching. So when you say, we're going to bar all Muslims, you are sending a message to the Muslim world. And you're also sending a message to the terrorists, because we now do have evidence. We have seen how Donald Trump is being used to essentially be a recruiter for more people to join the cause of terrorism. So I think if you go through many of his irresponsible, reckless, dangerous comments, it's not just somebody saying something off the cuff. We all misstate things. We all, may not be as careful in phrasing what we say. This is a pattern. It's a pattern that has gone on now for months. And it's a pattern that adds up, in my opinion, having watched presidents, having seen the incredibly difficult work that they do and the decisions that they have to make the thinking that goes in, sitting in the Situation Room. Do we go after bin Laden or not? I was part of that. Was it a clear, easy choice? Of course not. Did it have to be carefully parsed and analyzed? And then we all gave our opinions, but it was up to the president to decide. I know how hard this job is, and I know that we need steadiness as well as strength and smarts in it. And I have concluded he is not qualified to be president of the United States.
You don't think Donald Trump could make that call in that room about whether or not to go after bin Laden?
Based on what we know now, he could make it perhaps on evidence that wasn't clear. He could say a lot of things that might have given notice. I mean, you just, based on the way he has behaved and how he has spoken and the policies he has literally thrown out there, I think it adds up to a very troubling picture.
So you get into the general election if you're the nominee for your party?
I will be the nominee for my party, Chris. That is already done, in effect. There is no way that I won't be.
There is a senator from Vermont who has a different take on that.
Well,
he says he's going to fight to the end.
Yeah, that's right.
And there seems to be a change here as Donald Trump is trying to galvanize his party. In the Democratic Party, it seems to be going the other way. His supporters have become more aggressive, feeling that the system is rigged against the senator. We saw what happened in Nevada. When you saw that, did you believe that Sanders responded the right way to that situation?
Well, I was very disturbed by what went on there, but I am confident.
With him or with the supporters?
Well, what we saw
the
there.
Supporters.
Well, what we saw was disturbing, and you know, I have every confidence we're going to be unified. I understand.
Where does that confidence come from?
Well, in part from my own experience. You know, I went all the way to the end against then Senator Obama. I won 9 out of the last 12 contests. Back in '08, I won Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia. So I know the intense feelings that arise, particularly among your supporters as you go toward the end. But we both were following the same rules, just as both Senator Sanders and I are following the same rules. And I'm 3 million votes ahead of him, and I have an insurmountable lead in pledged delegates. And I am confident that just as I did with Senator Obama, where I said, you know what, it was really close, much closer than it is between me and Senator Sanders right now.
Votes-wise?
Yeah, I said, vote-wise and delegate-wise. I said, you know, in fact, if you depend on how you evaluated it, I had more popular vote, but I had fewer delegates. And the name of the game is how many delegates you have, right? So when I came out and withdrew and endorsed Senator Obama, about 40%, according to polls, about 40% of my supporters said they would never support him. So I worked really hard to make the case, as I'm sure Senator Sanders will, that whatever differences we might have, they pale in comparison to the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party. Name an issue you care about, domestic or international, and clearly we are much closer, Senator Sanders supporters and mine, than
reach out directly to Senator Sanders and do the work of reunification, of unification of the party, however you want to see it. I ask this because Senator Sanders has said to me in the past, and to many others, it's not my job to get my supporters to vote for Hillary Clinton. Clinton has to make the case to these supporters. And given what you're seeing with this increase in hostility and antagonism towards the process within the primaries on the Democratic side, should you reach out to Bernie Sanders and say, let's start doing this the right way. Let me start talking to the supporters. From your perspective, have you done that? Have you thought of doing that?
I've said many times what I've just said to everyone, including his supporters. And I am absolutely committed to doing my part, more than my part. But Senator Sanders has to do his part.